So no, it doesn't require any organization. The key thing to recognize is then that unlike mass murder, and this is very important, right? Unlike mass murder, genocide absolutely requires organization, right? It requires collective action, collective activity. You cannot have an instance, as far as I'm concerned, of genocide where the perpetrator is a single perpetrator, right? It's not an act of genocide. An act of genocide, multiple, thousands, hundreds of perpetrators organized with a very specific intent, you know, subscriptions to ideologies, blah, blah, blah. We'll talk about that in other videos. Okay. The condition now is, do one of these five concepts, do one of these five notions, any of these five notions require, and I've underlined require the act of killing. That means in order to say that we've fulfilled the requisite conditions to call the act any one of these five things, it must be the case that an act of killing has taken place, or acts of killings. It can be plural, it can be singular, it doesn't really matter, right? That it requires killing. Well, do crimes against humanity require, is it required in order to have the attribution of the label a crime against humanity? Is it required, is it necessary that individuals die? Well, no, it's not necessary that individuals die to have a crime against humanity. There's many cases of crimes against humanity, specific targeting of non-combatants, specific targeting of civilians, where civilians aren't killed, but are targeted and are tortured and are raped and are abused in any number of, you know, horrible fashions. But it's not necessary that death occur in order to have the attribution of the label crime against humanity, right? So that's the first misconception. Anytime you hear crime against humanity, you think, oh, automatically everybody, you have to kill somebody, right, in order to have a crime against humanity. That's false. I think the most surprising thing I'm going to say today is the next one, right? It's false to say that an act of genocide requires an act of killing, right? In order to have an act of genocide, you must have an act of killing. That's false. We saw earlier in this series of videos that an act of genocide is simply defined in terms of, and I'm just going to abbreviate now, genocide is defined in terms of the intent plus the act, right? So that we define genocide in terms of the intent plus the act. We saw, for example, one of the acts, I think it was Act E, number 5, said forcibly transferring children from one group to another, right? So forcibly taking one group of children from this group to that group, knowing that the population will lose its sort of ethnic identity because the children will be raised as some other group, in terms of some other group, and kill off the surviving members of the group. No one necessarily died. Not even necessarily. No one died in that example at all, right? There wasn't an act of killing. However, it was an act of genocide. Now, this is historically true. This has happened. Well, historically, there have overwhelmingly been thousands, if not millions, of individuals that were killed. But theoretically, it's not required to have an act of killing in order to attribute the event as an act of genocide, right? It's not required that individuals die in order for us to label the event, as a genocidal event, right? It's not a required condition, which is definitely surprising for sort of like an introductory discussion on genocide, because you think, okay, what do you think? And you think, oh, well, anytime we're talking about genocide, we're talking about killing a whole lot of people, right? The death of, you know, a lot of people. That is true. It's a very, very general sort of it's not a clear distinction in concepts, that discussion, but that is generally true. However, we recognize that if we're talking about genocide as both the combination of intent and act, and we have the intent, and the act doesn't require any killing in the act, as we saw, you can have an act of genocide without killing. So no, genocide does not require that killings occur. Obviously, there are instances of genocide where killings do occur, right? But it is not required, right, that individuals die in order for us to label this act as an act of genocide. Okay, war crimes. Obviously not, right? You can have war crimes that don't have anything to do with death. Torture, rape, mutilation, humiliation. All of these things do not involve death. However, you can still have the attribution of the concept war crime to your act based on some event that you partook in without ever having killed anyone, right? So it's also a misconception, which I think this is the most surprising thing to discuss, right? Because there's profound misconception about what these concepts mean. Ethnic cleansing, no, you don't have to have an act of killing. It's not required that individuals die. Let's talk about cleansing. You can achieve cleansing through this idea of purgation, where individuals are forced to emigrate, right? So they're forced to emigrate. If they find a better place to live and live, whatever, doesn't matter. I'm not systematically targeting individuals and killing individuals on my own accord. I am, however, forcibly removing individuals from their land, right? Which is not an act of killing. So it's not required to have the idea ethnic cleansing. The notion of killing isn't necessary in order to have that idea. Meaning, you can have the idea of ethnic cleansing, you can have the appropriation of the term ethnic cleansing to a particular event without any deaths having occurred, right? It's not likely, but you can't. Surprisingly, it's only the last one, right? In order to talk about mass murder, the only way that you can talk about mass murder is to talk about killing, right? Killing, specifically of 4 people consecutively, is a sufficient condition for the appropriation of the term mass murder. What I hope that this diagram shows, though, it's general. It makes a few generalizations, but I think it's pretty clear. And the intent was to show sort of visually, and there's many more criteria that I can flesh out, right? You can really sort of go crazy on the stats and making delineations and appropriations and blah blah blah, but I'm not going to do that now. These are just a few.